Our presentation is about examining school change, a 3-year look at implementing restorative practices. I am Dr. Kimiya Sohrab Maghzi from the University of Redlands, and with me are Dr. Marni Fisher from Saddleback College, and our school counselor, Eryn McDaniel from Community Roots Academy, and Tara Falce, a PhD student at the University of Latvia. So the purpose of this research was to explore the restorative practices as a framework for inclusion. As such, implementation serves as a means of promoting collaboration and communal empowerment, leading towards a transformation of communities for equity and inclusion advocates for those who are typically excluded. This includes children with disabilities, educators with disabilities, and teachers of special education who are typically left out of the discourse. So restorative practices serve as a guiding theoretical framework for our study. While the literature presents varied definitions of restorative justice and restorative practice, we wanted to establish a universally accepted definition, but that remained challenging. Drawing from Frenbermer's ecological systems theory, songs and justice is understood as a guiding principle and practice that schools and communities use to inform policies, programs, and interventions. These principles examine repairing harm in relationships, empowering all stakeholders, and fostering collaborative community problem solving. Restorative practices distinguish themselves from traditional punitive approaches by reframing the core questions. Rather than asking what rules are being broken and who is at fault, restorative practices ask about who was harmed, and the needs behind the incident and how to make things right. This shift must occur at all levels, starting with leadership, extending to teachers and staff, and ultimately becoming embedded in student thinking and behavior.
When we're looking at restorative questions versus traditional approaches, we want to reframe the way we're asking our questions. So rather than asking what rules were broken and who's at fault, restorative practices ask about who was harmed, the needs behind the incident, and how to make things right. This shift, however, must occur at all levels, like was already stated. And while restorative practices share some similarities with positive behavioral interventions and supports, PBIS, they go further by engaging both the heart and the mind. And they function as a decision-making framework that applies evidence-based practices to improve academic and behavioral outcomes.
Restorative practices may be understood through two complementary perspectives: the process conception and the values conception. Process conception focuses on the healing and restoration by bringing together everyone affected by an incident to discuss the facts, share their experiences, and agree about how to repair the harm. The values conception highlights the philosophical shift from punitive justice. Infractions were seen as violations of rules warranting punishment under punitive justice. But under restorative practices, this sees infractions as violations of people and relationships that need to be healed. This perspective assumes that violations create obligations and that justice must actively involve victims, offenders, and the community. Rather than isolating or removing the offender as an anomaly, restorative practices address the harm within the context of human connections, societal influences, and community responsibilities. This inclusive approach seeks to repair not only the harm experienced by victims in the community, but also the harm experienced by the offender, fostering conditions for reintegration and long-term behavioral change. By making the ecological layers and collaborative processes explicit, this framework aligns with the school consultation literature, and it encourages researchers and practitioners to view interactions between school policies, home, school partnerships, peer relationships, and multi-tiered systems of support through a restorative lens. Within this study, the ecological approach complements a professional learning community model operating under adaptive leadership. Recognizing that key restorative practices exist in classrooms, within school policies, and in family partnerships. Prismatic theory builds on Deleuze and Guattari's concept of rhizomatic theory. This involves mapping rather than tracing previous paths. The idea of the rhizome circles around a phenomenon in order to deterritorialize arborescent paradigms or set thinking patterns. Prismatic theory focuses on finding what has been overlooked and hidden with the goal of improving education.
Our research methodology used collaborative prismatic inquiry, which works with prism theory and layers perspectives in order to develop a better map of a phenomenon. In this case, observations and interviews with 6 administrators and narratives written by 4 educators were collected and layered. After discussion, key players from each year were asked to summarize results, which were then reviewed by each team.
When a community routinely suspends students for behaviors, problems, or disruptions, it weakens the classroom's ability to manage discipline, leading to more behavioral issues over time. This practice also reduces the student's connection to the community while reinforcing the idea that the student, not the behavior, is the problem. Traditional discipline is paternalistic, controlling large populations with less individual power and more dominant authority, which perpetuates inequality. It relies on external enforcement to make individuals follow rules, weakening the community's capacity to self-regulate behavior and hindering fair processes. This approach resembles Pavlovian conditioning. Punishment works only if consistently applied, but behavior often increases when individuals are not caught. It also equates individuals with crimes, reducing fairness and reinforcing systematic inequalities. In schools, exclusion as punishment fuels the school-to-prison pipeline, making traditional discipline less effective and leading to more behavioral problems.
In contrast, restorative practices aim to foster social harmony and repair relationships. They emphasize the connected individuals behave better and promote democratic practices, boosting community and individual power. So basically thinking about how when we feel like we belong within our community, we're more likely to behave better and respond better when harm is done. In addition, it also supports the breaking the school to prison pipeline by separating the person from their behavior and focusing on fair procedures. Again, that piece of making sure they're included in the community and have a say in what happens next. That also helps diminish the power imbalances and the influence of the dominant power structure, which will reduce inequality. When looking at year 1 at the schools that we looked at, the initial implementation year revealed significant systemic resistance to transformative change, exposing how deeply traditional punitive structures had become embedded within educator practices and institutional culture. This was my first year as a school counselor at the school that we were looking at, and there was a lot of pushback in implementing a lot of the restorative practices that we wanted because we had to shift the mindset of our leaders and shift the mindset of our staff and teachers and everyone involved in supporting our students. Year 2 involved a refocus on the goal of implementing restorative practices, and support was differentiated for teachers when it realized that intuitively engaging with restorative language was more impactful than, shifting our approach in how we were supporting teachers helped. So we emphasized building the skills within the teachers through integrating our social emotional learning throughout our school, and that was done widely by our school counselors like myself. So we provided restorative practices training during individual PLCs with grade levels for them to connect and collaborate on how are we responding to student behavior, with that focus on what harm was done, who was hurt by it, and how can we repair the harm within our school community and in our classroom communities. Year 3 is our current year right now, and our plans for growth involve continuing to build teacher skill set in restorative practices and emphasizing the importance of the community building and the proactive approach of restorative practices. So we did, counselors led, including myself, led a whole staff training focused on how do we respond to student behavior, how do we respond to conflicts between students, and then implementing and supporting that implementation within the classroom. In addition, we created an SEL team PLC where one teacher from each grade level now has the time and space to connect with other teachers in the grade level and the counselors on how to respond in more proactive and inclusive ways for our students that are having struggles at school. The next biggest thing that we did was foster a bigger and better sense of community school-wide. And we do that through our wellness events that are facilitated by our counselors and our SEL team. And that helps facilitate student inclusivity and connectedness across our school campus.
Do you want me to take it?
Yeah.
Okay, so the step from theory to practice was not smooth at the school. Some educators embraced restorative practices while others tried to implement more traditional punishments. Working on community at all levels and redirecting the teams took time, as you could see in the earlier slides, which was frustrating for some leaders, especially the first year. Other leaders focused on that differentiated aspect of support so that each teacher had scaffolded training and individual work to do. Attrition affected both the supporters and the detractors, so there were shifts as teachers left the school. Many educators saw the school's established professional learning communities as key spaces for improving community at the educator level, which was unique for restorative practices. It also served as a key space for improving restorative language practices and social emotional skills. Of key importance was that the leadership team continued to maintain their goal of establishing restorative practices throughout the school despite the initial struggles. This involved improvement at all levels, including establishing follow-up training and support throughout the school year. While the older literature suggests that the school psychologist should be the front runner for restorative practices, the school psychologist's time in the past 9 years has been taken up more and more by testing for special education, leaving little time for general ed. The roles of school counselors, however, changed significantly after COVID, expanding their areas of support. As such, school counselors are the ideal leads for working with teams of parents, teachers, and administrators in building a restorative system.
So, what are the questions to consider? 1. What model of school discipline have you seen in schools? 2. Have you seen restorative practices influence relationships, community, empowerment, and equity? How does this compare to traditional punitive models? And 3, what leadership, cultural, and relational conditions are necessary for school-wide adoption of restorative practices to move beyond reactive conflict resolution towards proactive community building?
Restorative practices is inherently linked to advocacy because it seeks to amplify marginalized voices, dismantle inequitable power structures, and promote inclusive participation in decision making. Advocating for restorative practices means advocating for systems that protect dignity, ensure fairness, and empower communities to take collective responsibility for well-being and discipline. In education, this involves championing proactive relationship building, challenging punitive discipline that disproportionately actually harms certain groups of students of color, and ensuring that cultural identity and student voice are central to school policies and practices. And these are our references.
And thank you.
Thank you very much.